This essay will be an exploration into the ways visual effects, abbreviated VFX, are used in media to influence and drive narratives. We will be looking at a variety of examples from film, TV, and games. To begin with, why don't we cover a few simple questions? Visual effects are a tool used to create or alter moving images. This includes things from fully computer-generated environments to color grading and everything in between. Simply put, narratives are stories. They exist everywhere, from films we see to news and even politics. For the purpose of this essay, we are specifically looking at narratives in the fictional sense, in terms of film, TV, and video games. Now that that's out of the way, let's get started. To start with, we will examine the work of David Fincher to see how his teams use VFX by exploring one of their many applications. Those of you familiar with Fincher's filmography may not realise just how VFX heavy his productions are, and this is in part the main reason they are so effective. Let's take Mindhunter as an example. Set in the late 70s, the show follows two FBI agents as they go around the country interviewing serial killers, in the hopes to use what they learn to help catch other killers. On the surface, it doesn't sound like there is a lot here that one would need VFX for. However, as this breakdown from our temple shows, there is a large amount of work that can be done following the conclusion of principal photography, as we will now break down. Here we can see that they are adding in extra foliage and enhancing the colour of the grass to make it brighter. This makes their neighbourhood look more rural and in keeping with this time period. Not only adding but removing is also possible with VFX, so pieces of film equipment, such as this camera track here, can be removed, saving time during principal photography. Next up is this shot. Here they have deliberately chosen to use VFX rather than use old television sets from the time period, as it would not have been cost effective given that this shot is only a few seconds long. Furthermore, designing this scene practically would have required digital effects anyway, as they would have needed to composite the news footage onto the real props. Being all CG also allows the camera to move through the shop front window and zoom out from the newsreader's eyes, maintaining Fincher's specific omniscient camera style. For this set piece, even though the location scouts have found an excellent set to shoot this crime scene, the artists were still able to enhance its rustic feel by remodeling the building, as well as adding extra trash piles throughout. They have also improved the depth here by adding volumetrics such as smoke and snow, enhancing the atmosphere and mood the show overall maintains. In this clip, they have removed a modern New Alliance sign with something more accurate of the time, and removed the recessed curbs, as they are also not accurate of this period. In this episode, a montage is used to show a long period of time passing as the two main characters travel across the country. To show this effect without the crew also having to travel across the country as well, they have used a collection of green screen sets and clever compositing to make it look as if they have been to many different places. One thing you may have noticed about the VFX on display here is that its main purpose is to deceive, to trick the viewer into believing what they are watching is more true to life than just a film set. After all, the viewer needs to believe they are watching drama unfold in a very specific time and place in history. Sometimes it's possible to achieve this with good costume and set design alone, but eventually these tools will start to become limitations in where the narratives can go. Take the film Her as an example. A lot of work was done in production design to make a more warm and hopeful view of the future come to life. But in order to achieve wide sweeping shots of the city the film takes place in, they had to composite the skylines of downtown LA and Shanghai together, as detailed by Captain Christian in his excellent video on the film, linked in the description. Continuing to use Fincher as a springboard, we will take a look at an earlier film of his, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. There are many things worth highlighting about the way Fincher's teams utilize VFX, in this film in particular. To do that, let's take a deeper look at the VFX breakdown provided by Digital Domain. As mentioned in a prior clip, where snow and fog was used to create depth, the same effects are used here to a much greater degree to make this scene more unfriendly and unwelcoming, as well as enhancing the mood and the tone. This creates a sense of the character's apprehension and creates a foreboding feeling to the narrative. One thing Fincher is infamous for in the film industry is the amount of takes he will shoot for any given scene. There are a lot of good reasons to do this, but naturally this starts to become tedious and time consuming for makeup and set design, especially the sets that require redressing or the reapplication of makeup such as blood. This is why, in a lot of his projects, Fincher uses CG blood instead of makeup. It is particularly impressive in this scene where Lisbeth is giving first aid to Mikhail. Not only does it give the editors more freedom in cutting the scene together, prioritizing performance over makeup, it also allows the scene to be staged in a more believable way, in terms of both character behaviours and the gritty realism of sewing up a wound in less than ideal conditions. Behaviours such as Lisbeth splashing vodka at Mikhail unsympathetically, and Mikhail wincing when having the dental floss pulled through his skin. Finally, in this scene, Lisbeth is in pursuit of a killer, and the vast majority of the scene was created digitally, allowing the camera to move the way it does, keeping the scene in visual continuity with the rest of the film. In shots that are primarily practical, the VFX team had to replace the stunt performer's head with Lisbeth's. Now the cheaper and easier alternative would have been for the stunt performer to wear a helmet, securing their head and eliminating the need for the effect. This wouldn't have been an issue narratively either, as it's established that Lisbeth always wears a helmet, but it would not have been in keeping with her character to stop to put a helmet on when in immediate pursuit of a killer. Hopefully these clips have helped to show that VFX has a lot more applications than just making the impossible come to life, especially when it comes to immersion. In the end, it's these types of effects that really help to bring stories to life. Sadly, this category of VFX is often overlooked in the same way as audio design, as they are at their best when they are seamless and invisible. To create CG humans indistinguishable from real people. Many consider this to be the holy grail of visual effects. As technology improves over time, it's more and more likely that in the future we will start seeing even more CG humans in our media. So far, we have seen deceased actors reprise roles for small scenes, such as Peter Cushing in Rogue One, and in the case of The Irishman, allowing older actors to play younger versions of themselves. When it came to making The Irishman, Scorsese was adamant that any VFX technology used to de-age the actors must not get in the way of the performances. As this was to be a very character-driven story with the three leads playing the same character over the course of a long stretch of time, you can understand how motion capture equipment would have gotten in the way, especially as the technology would have been needed for the entire film, unlike in Blade Runner 2049, where it was only needed for one short scene. Now, it can be argued that motion capture equipment isn't 100% restrictive when it comes to obtaining nuanced performances. There are a host of examples from video games of such performances in coherence with their equipment, such as Joel and Ellie in The Last of Us.
Not her, you know.
What?
Maria told me about Sarah.
Ellie?
And
You are treading on some mighty thin ice here.
I'm sorry about your daughter, Joel. But I have lost people too.
You have no idea what loss is.
Everyone I have cared for has either died or left me. Everyone fucking except for you. So don't tell me that I would be safer with someone else, because the truth is I would just be more scared.
You're right. You're not my daughter. And I sure as hell ain't your dad.
But returning back to film for now, it wasn't just the suits and the trackers that the team on The Irishman wanted to avoid. They also wanted to film on real sets with real lights. This is what required the innovation from ILM. Traditionally, when it comes to creating CG faces, a lot of the work has to be done by hand, or at the very least cleaned up by hand. This is manageable if the subject is only in the film for a scene or two, but when it comes to The Irishman, the effect would be required for the entire film, thus necessitating the use of AI and algorithm. There simply wouldn't be enough time, let alone artists, to complete the project if it was all done by hand. To begin with though, the team had to collect hundreds of reference images of De Niro, Pacino and Pesci's younger selves in their older movies, as well as capturing a high-fidelity suite of expressions for the system to blend between. Now that they had a way for the system to create the CG replicas, they needed a way to capture the performance without using obtrusive markers or green screen sets. What was engineered is a camera setup where the main camera is flanked on each side by a witness camera. The witness camera recorded in infrared, meaning it did not capture shadows, giving the system a clear way to retopologize the features of their faces, whilst maintaining the look and tone of the image, born from the lighting and cinematography captured with the main camera. It is debatable to the extent of which the effects in The Irishman succeeded in maintaining immersion for its audience. However, it is not so much the present that we should be focused on, as it is the potential future of technologies like these. For example, it won't be long before we start seeing CG humans seamlessly inhabit scenes with real actors. However, it is vitally important that effects like these, and all effects in general, are used in service to the narrative, not the other way around. While video games of recent time are certainly starting to catch up to film in terms of photorealism, they will always have to manage the fact that they are rendered in real time, meaning that frames need to be rendered at a minimum of 30 per second, whereas in film, frames can take hours or days to be rendered. For example, we've seen ray tracing being used in film and TV for a long time now, as they can take as long as they need to calculate the millions of light rays required. But with the recent advent of RTX via Nvidia's hardware accelerated Turing cards, games are only now being able to take advantage of this far more realistic method of light simulation. Let's now take a look at Control, one of the few games using ray-traced effects, to see how improvements in rendering techniques can create far more realistic environments. To do this, we will be using Digital Foundry's excellent video on the topic, again linked in the description. Firstly, let's discuss reflections. For a game set in a modern environment like Control, with lots of reflective surfaces, it's very important that they are accurate. Traditionally, games use a rendering technique called screen space reflections, whereby anything in the screen space is able to be displayed in the reflective materials, as demonstrated here in Doom by Digital Foundry. As you can see, as soon as the door is no longer in the camera's field of view, it disappears from the reflection. This is something environment artists would need to, at least, take into consideration when creating playable spaces. But with the introduction of ray-traced reflections, it gives artists more freedom when it comes to designing spaces. As well as regular reflections, transparency reflections are now able to be path-traced, creating some very believable effects. One thing that makes game environments traditionally feel fake, as pointed out by Digital Foundry, are the way shadows don't connect to the objects casting them, making a lot of things seem like they are floating just above the surface. This is another limitation ray tracing helps clean up, as seen here, where the objects are given a much more grounded feel. It's worth noting that this is only a problem when it comes to dynamic objects. Objects that are static are able to have baked-in shadows, which are much more accurate. When these effects are rendered together, they create some truly next-generation visuals. However, in the here and now, it takes the most expensive PC hardware available to run them at a consistent frame rate, making them somewhat inaccessible. Which is a shame for the players of today, but these steps are necessary if these rendering techniques are to become mainstream. And as both Sony and Microsoft have confirmed their next generation consoles will have hardware accelerated ray tracing, it seems the future isn't too far away. Regardless of technology, games will always have the potential of being far more immersive than film or TV, with some games taking place in the first-person perspective, where you can sometimes see your own character's arms and body. Additionally, players often become an active agent in the narrative, no longer just a passive observer, with some games having multiple endings or world states depending on player choice. The Witcher 3 is a great example of this, and for a more detailed analysis, check out the video Like Stories of Old made about the game, linked in the description. Something interesting with games though is they don't need to be photorealistic to tell an emotional or engaging narrative, much in the same way as it is in animation. They can take on a variety of unique and interesting art styles to complement or contrast their own stories. This is particularly useful for independent studios who lack the funding to create AAA photorealistic characters and environments. One particularly strong example is the Life is Strange franchise. Let's take a closer look at the first game in the series, released in 2015. We will specifically focus on what the game calls moments of calm, where the player can pause and take in the world around them, often accompanied by beautiful pieces of music and ambient sound effects. As you can see, the game takes on a painterly look, as all textures in the game are hand-painted in Photoshop or equivalent tools, as opposed to being generated or based from real images. This art style really enhances the tone and character of the world, especially in scenes like these with dramatic lighting and subtle cinematography. The result is that for many players, these areas and the stories told here become deep-rooted into their memories. Another reason studios decide to use a less realistic art style is it enables them to make longer and more complex games. This is often common for games made in Japan and other Asian countries. One example from a long-running series of JRPGs is Persona 5, which has an average completion time of 110 hours. Being able to make a game this long enables the writers to create as many stories and characters as the narrative as a whole requires. This is something film and TV aren't well equipped to do. It is often the case that games will be split into different narrative delivery elements. In most cases, there is at least two: in-engine gameplay and pre-rendered cutscenes. Cutscenes often share the same VFX pipeline as traditional live-action CGI, such as the opening credits of Death Stranding that look straight out of a big-budget film, which seamlessly transitions into an in-engine cutscene that seamlessly transitions again into gameplay. Cutscenes are used when the designers want to have full control of a narrative moment, where they can use traditional film language to tell their stories. They also have full control over the scene, whereas in gameplay, the player may happen to look away and miss an important moment. Contrastly, some players don't like the use of cutscenes, and would rather experience the same story beat in the gameplay. This then becomes a balancing act for most studios, where the director of the game must use the tools at their disposal to create the most immersive experience. Returning to Persona 5 for the moment, they use traditional Japanese animation, otherwise known as anime, for a select few cutscenes, often to show something for the first time that the game's engine might not be able to do full justice, such as this moment in the game when the Phantom Thieves find themselves in an Egyptian desert, complete with a towering pyramid. Or this cutscene where the cast find themselves on a ship sailing through a flooded world. These examples show that when a game maintains a specific art style or level of technicality, it doesn't prevent them from having more grandiose moments. To sum up, we've seen how VFX can be used for more than just making the impossible real. We have had a look at examples of VFX being used to enhance live-action scenes by way of weather effects or additional foliage. We've seen what the future of VFX could bring to media by way of CG humans, and finally looking at the ways rendering techniques from VFX of the past is being brought to the video games of the future. Hopefully, some of the things highlighted here have helped to show some of the invisible ways VFX are used in all media. We didn't even have a chance to cover many of the other things included within the VFX bubble. Things such as color grading, which is largely responsible for a lot of the mood and tone of most media, yet often overlooked. Things like physics simulations which allow for large bodies of water or collapsing structures, and so on. Finally, there is one more point worth reiterating, and that's that VFX and all aspects of filmmaking should always be in service to the narrative. Thanks for watching, everyone. As you might be able to tell, this is my first time making such a video like this, so apologies for the rough audio. My microphone isn't that great, and my delivery is less than ideal. This video was made as part of my university course. I'm doing a university course on games, interactive design, and one of the modules is to make an essay on a topic of your choice and develop it over the course of the course, basically. So originally I chose narrative, and now in my final year I've moved on to visual effects and narrative. And I chose to make a video essay, given that a lot of what I talk about in this essay needed a visual aid, so it made sense, really. And yeah, thanks again for watching. I hope to be able to make more stuff like this in the future. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Anyway, yeah, have a great day. Bye.